These are kind of the macro views of what I'm going to unpack in more detail over these sessions. The last session was the macro view of relationship versus rules. This is the macro view of experience versus information. You ever had a favorite movie? You go and you see the movie, and then you try to tell someone about a scene, right? You're like, it was so funny. This guy said this, and then this guy said this, and the whole audience. And that's what happens, right? They're like, And what do you say to them? Had to be there. I guess you had to be there. When my late wife and I were, like most young couples, just scrounging together to get a vehicle that had all 4 cylinders running. and we actually had a prophetic word we were holding on to. We were given the value of the car, the price we would get it for, which was less than the value of it, and the meaning of the name of the car, and the color. Pretty good word. But it didn't make that much sense to us at the time. It was only after. Because we often don't know until we've experienced, and when we experience, we look back and say, oh, that's what that was. Interestingly, it was a Toyota Previa. I don't even think they make them anymore. But they were these egg-shaped minivans. They had these real sloping lines, and they looked like an egg driving down the highway. We became the proud owners of a Toyota Previa. And you know what was amazing? I saw Previas everywhere after that. I had never seen a Previa. But having owned one and experienced one, all of a sudden my eyes are open and it's like everyone has a Previa. Everyone's driving a Previa. I'd been driving these same streets. Nobody had a Previa. Got a Previa? Got the Previa experience. I see Previas. This is an insight into how God wants to disciple us. Life is meant to be experienced with Him. Now, these are all kind of ways of saying the same thing. Relationship versus rules, experience versus information. I already talked about the 2 trees, but that was the choice. Do you want the tree of life? Everything life is. The experience of life, the communication of life, the walking with God in the garden in the cool of the day, or do you want knowledge? Do you want to know good and evil? Well, you can choose, and God gave them that choice. And the poison was, I would rather know than experience. And here's where it gets really tricky, and you got to go back. I know it feels like I just keep selling course 1, but you got to get the full unpack of this. The good of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is just as dangerous as the evil of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You can be so focused on good and trying to avoid evil, and you aren't actually relating to God or experiencing God. You're just seeking to grow in your knowledge of good and avoid evil. And you're obsessed in the wrong direction. You can only possess what you experience. And God wants us to experience Him and be transformed into that. This leads us to confident sanctification. Listen to this. I'm going to say this twice. When you grow in the love of God, where the experience of God is more important than information about right and wrong, about good and evil, about virtue versus vice. Most of our discipleship is learn to do good, practice avoiding evil, and you will grow in God. That's most of our discipleship. But that leaves you constantly subject to accusation, intimidation, feelings of separation, anxiety, disappointment when you fail, because you aren't looking at Him And you are looking at a standard of performance that condemns your failure. So the only way to have confident sanctification is when mistakes and failure hold equal value in relationship to perfect love. I'm going to say that again. Confident sanctification happens when mistakes and failure hold equal value in relationship to perfect love, rather than as cause for separation from God, a canceled destiny, or burdens of shame. Mistakes and failure under the law will make you feel like you just forfeited your destiny. It'll make you feel like Esau, not Jacob. It'll make you feel like you failed God. He's disappointed in you. It'll make you feel like He's taken one step away from you, maybe 3 or 4. It'll make you feel like He's turned His back on you, rather than realizing you're not looking at Him anymore. And you're letting an external code define you. And that definition is highlighting the difference between your experience with God and the information you have about God. That's this, right? When you sweep the toddler up when he falls, that's saying your mistake is not greater than my love. And I would rather you fall toward me than stand confidently facing away from me. I would rather you make 100 mistakes coming to me. I love every one of those because you're coming to me. I'll talk to you through that. I'll work with you through that. I'll love you through that. And every time He talks to us and works with us and loves us through that, we become more established in love. We become confident. I have nothing to fear from pressing on and failing 100 times, 1,000 times. Every one of them is a step toward Him, as long as I keep believing His arms are outstretched. This is perhaps the most critical lack in the church: shallow roots in the love of God, which automatically means we are mixing law with life in the Spirit. I keep pushing the wrong button. Ephesians 3, Paul's prayer was that Christ would dwell. Now see, that's a foundation word. How do you have a dwelling? How do you have something permanent? How do you have something that won't move? How do you have something that's unshakable? Do you know that Christ wants to dwell in you? Do you know that we make it hard for Him to dwell because we're constantly like, how can I do something to impress you? How can this? We're shaking sand. He is meant to be our foundation. We get locked onto Him. Now His foundation is our foundation. And when we are in the place of abiding faith, He has a place to abide. He can dwell in us, in our hearts through faith, rooted and grounded in love. What? So that we can comprehend all of the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ which surpasses knowledge. Well, there's a problem. How do you know what surpasses knowledge? Listen, this can't contain it. This is a water balloon. Hook up the knowledge of God, infinite, finite. The way you know what surpasses knowledge is you become a water hose. It's like, I may not get it all, but you're mine and I'm yours, and you just flow through me all you want. Every bit of you come through me, and I'm gonna believe and rest and trust. And God says, I can actually dwell in that. And you're gonna know degrees of love beyond your knowing. You're gonna know my love in ways that surpass knowledge. Why? Because you experience it. And you possess what you experience. You can memorize facts, but you can only possess what you experience. Actually, there's one more point on this. We have Eden and Sinai. There's the divine standard. We have the principles of life that were the always the heart of God, the perfection of God, the glory of God, the divine standard. And the principles of life in the garden were meant to be received in relationship. Why do I say this? Because when Adam fell, God asked one question. Who told you you were naked? Think about that. What they had prior was something where Adam and Eve only got anything from God Himself. It was that eye to eye. It was life. It was intimacy. So now they try to clothe themselves after their failure, and God's question to them is, I didn't tell you you were naked. How did you know? It wasn't in relationship with me.